not, but I have friends that I visit with some regularity in the area. I love the rain. The reason I continue to live in the Pacific Northwest is for the 7 to 9 months of the year that it's kind of like this. Yeah.
And hello, this is Bill Cunningham. I work at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I'm helping Marty out with some of the land use and access to services components of the plan, relationship to the project area. Besides project staff, I used to actually work at a home-based business in the area, a little bit to the southeast of Woodstock. Thoughts about recent rain? Well, we recently had our house re-roofed, so it's going to be proof of concept. Does it work? Do those newfangled horizontal slats they've sliced into the roof actually work? So I'll wait and see. Let's see, I have Aaron Klein showing up on my screen.
Hey everyone, Aaron, use he, him pronouns. My relationship with the area is I live and bike and walk in the neighborhood and care about my friends who have kids and the safety of those kids who walk and bike and such things in the neighborhood, also go to school in the neighborhood. And I was on vacation last week, so I left Portland in the summer and came back in the fall, and my backyard, my lawn is green again. And I'm thinking of soup, also our meal planning this week changed totally. And there was something else, but I forgot it. But I do like not having to, not feeling excessively warm overnight. It's kind of nice to have the like cooler is easier to deal with a blanket than hotter is to deal with windows and things like that. And I'll hand it over to Valeria.
Thank you. Valeria McWilliams, I use she, her pronouns, and I live, walk, and ride in the neighborhood. My family and I reside in the Lentz neighborhood, Holgate and 82nd. My thoughts about the recent rain. Just thinking a lot about the folks that are living in our streets after, having to deal with the recent heat waves, now having to deal with the rain, and just thinking what it's, like to be in constant sort of survival mode. I can pass it on to Tim Williams.
Hi, I don't know how to use Zoom apparently. My name is Tim Williams. I use he, him. My wife and I are raising our 3 kids in Mount Scott, Arleta, and the oldest just started kindergarten at Arleta Elementary. So I grew up in Oregon, so I'm used to the rain and I quite enjoy it, but we have a leak in the roof of our business, which is kind of frustrating. So I always think about that when it starts raining. I'll pass it on to Pam Hodge.
Hello, everyone. Pam Hodge, she, her pronouns, and I am a long-term resident of Brentwood, Darlington, and we're at the very southern end on the Clackamas County border, 58th and Harney Drive. And I grew up here, so I'm used to the rain, and I'm very thankful that I don't have to go out and water every night. So yay for that. So I will pass it on to Nancy, I believe. Nancy, I don't know whether you're having technical difficulties still. So what should we do? Should I pick someone else?
Yeah, we Pam and I were with Nancy earlier, and she was having some trouble with her audio. Hopefully, Nancy. Hopefully, Nancy, you can hear us. We're going to move on, but feel free to put your response in the chat. We'd sure love to hear from you. Pam, feel free to pick someone else, and maybe we can come back to Nancy.
Okay, what about Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick Sovey, he, him pronouns, and I live in Woodstock, and I work for Rose Community Development, which does affordable housing and other kinds of community development in the project area. So I'll pass it on to Eleanor. Have you gone yet?
Hi, everyone. I'm Eleanor, she, her. I live, ride, play with my 3-year-old in Mount Scott, near 67th and Carlton. Very excited for the rain because I've had a tremendous amount of gardening failures after the heat dome. And so I'm really hoping that a moderate climate will improve that. I've lived here for about 2 years. Okay, so next up, Julie, have you gone? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julie Garner. I live in Lentz at 86th and Knapp. And yeah, I'm a part of this project because I'm a bike rider and I want safer and slower streets. And I'd also love to see more commercial businesses in the area. So I have places that are closer to go to instead of having to drive far away. And I grew up here, so I love the rain. I'm used to it. And having a yard is rain is very exciting when you have a yard because it's like, yay, they're all getting a drink. And yeah, I guess the only thing I don't really like riding in the rain, but I do it. I have rain pants. So, but yeah, otherwise I love rain and I love listening to the sound of it on the roof. So let's see, how about Kathy Brock?
I'm Kathy Brock, she, her, and I'm a longtime homeowner in the area. So I'm very interested in how this area might develop. In fact, it's a little shocking. My house has been featured in several photos that in the report. It's in the background on the cover of the commercial real estate report. So obviously this is the target area. I have intense interest. As for the fall, this is actually
I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear?
a little bit.
I think that worked.
So I don't know how to transfer it, Marty.
Oh, I can hear you now. Oh, did you want to
I was going to transfer it to Ryan, but I didn't know what I had to do, if anything.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, thanks.
Ryan, you're muted.
Thought I had the space bar going there for a minute, but I guess not. So Ryan Ernst, he, him, live at Tenino 57th and Flavel Drive. I'm always interested in learning more about how the city works, and maybe how it doesn't work in Brentwood, Darlington, and how I scratch my head and bang my head against the wall constantly. Got a 3-year-old, so I'm very interested in this project, and got like 7 kids along my street that I'm interested in not getting ran over. And the rain, well, the rain means that the creeks get a little bit more water, which means when I throw my rope to rappel down the waterfalls, it's a little bit more fun than it is when they're dry. And I will pass it on to, let's go with Bill Cunningham.
I already shared. Let's see, has Vivian shared yet?
Nope, not yet. Thanks, Bill. Hi,
Sure.
everybody. I'm Vivian, she, her pronouns. I lived in Woodstock for about 3 years, just north of Duke. And most recently, my mom moved in with me this summer. So that's, it's been nice. I'm starting to see the neighborhood from her eyes and also worry about how she's going to get around. As for the rain, I was excited and getting prepared. I fixed siding, I cleaned the gutters, but I forgot to move my worm bins in. So I think I drowned about 500 worms accidentally. So that was unfortunate. But other than that, I'm excited about the rain and just the cool nights now. And I will go with Ben Waterhouse, if you haven't gone yet.
Hi, I'm Ben Waterhouse. I use he, him pronouns. I live and work with my spouse 2 houses away from our lead elementary. And I'm involved in this process because I'm really excited about having safer streets and more accessible communities for everyone living in the project area. And with the fall, I'm mostly just excited about the sound. I've really missed this over the very dry summer. I'll pass to Michael Kennedy.
Hello, I'm Michael Kennedy. I live in Mount Scott Arletta as well. I love the rain. It's why I moved to Oregon. I wish it would rain every day and never stop raining. That's just my kind of weather. I'm interested in this project because I want to ride my bike more without getting ran over or being scared. And I'd like more commercial options in our neighborhood and more residential density in our neighborhood, and a much better pedestrian transportation network.
You're mute, Michael.
I'm on my phone, so I can't really see who's next to me like y'all can. So let's go with Jed.
Thanks, Michael. I'm Jed Hafner. I use he, him pronouns. I live just outside the project area, but I spend a lot of time walking, biking, and now taking a stroller with my 2-week-old son. And that has been a big change in seeing like what sidewalks and transportation has been like too. So I really like the rain. I'm excited to go look for mushrooms somewhere because that means they must be back somewhere. Let's see, Melanie Lambert.
Thanks, Jed. I've heard mushrooms are pretty prolific. They're definitely around to be found. I have lived in the area for about 8 years now, but I've been in Portland for about 40, and I just can't get used to the rain. I love the sun, and I pretty much, I live for those days we had last week where it's kind of cool, but also super sunny. So I love the rain when I listen to it going to sleep, and I definitely don't let it stop me from doing anything. My dad lives with me, and he's from California, and he really doesn't do anything if the rain happens. So like a true Californian, Southern Californian, but he's getting used to realizing that you can't just wait for the clear days. And I just, on Facebook and next door, all the shootings, it's like, this is even worse than it was when we first started this project. And so I'm just concerned about that. Also want the safety of the streets, and I'm, part of the Ridwell, of course. I mean, I do that, but I also do the adopt one block. So I've gotten rid of a couple couches in the area, but I just want this place to be nice. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And we can just all hopefully get along, but it seems like we've got a long road to hoe. Let's see, who else we have here? Carolyn.
Hi, thank you. I'm Carol Ann. I bought my first home this year on 80th and Carlton. I want to be involved with this project because, like I shared in the first meeting, my boyfriend was killed on 148th and Powell by a hit and run driver. So last year, so the street safety is really important to me, and we've had so many street deaths this last year, and this year it's just absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I'm also worried about the shootings, but I'm also tremendously worried about the street fatalities. I found out the other day that I'm a 4th generation Oregonian. So unlike some of you, I really don't like the rain. I have 2 dogs, and walking them in the rain every day gets really old really fast. Wet dog is like the worst smell ever. So anyway, yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And I think everyone has gone except for Nancy. Did she ever get connected? Or if anyone else that I skipped over, but I feel like everyone. Oh, Hector. I'm sorry. I thought Hector introduced himself. Sorry, Hector.
Yeah, you're fine. My name is Hector Rodriguez. I am with ODOT. I'm one of the senior planners for the long range department. I'm enrolled with the projects. I help with the management of the grant. And something about the rain that I'm looking forward is like, maybe people stay in will help to reduce the spread of the virus. So we're totally gonna get out of this for next year. So thank you.
Nancy, are you able to chime in verbally, or if not, again, just welcome you to add to the chat if you're able to, but we'd like to hear from you when you're able to. Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started with the going over the summer outreach. So if Shane, if you wouldn't mind, yep, bringing back the presentation and moving to the next slide. So really quickly, just before we could do the summer public involvement summary, it's always good to kind of touch base on where we're at with the plan and the timeline. So again, this is both a long range transportation and land use planning effort. We are specifically looking at how to increase both livability and housing stability as a part of our land use and transportation, as well as just improve access to employment, schools, local services, amenities, and recreational opportunities in the area. So that's kind of what we're looking at for this project. As far as the timeline goes, we are kind of wrapping up the existing conditions phase of the project. And so, that, of course, like many of our projects, our timelines start to slide a little bit because we just realize that this work is really rich and it takes a while to do. But we are wrapping up the existing conditions aspect of the work with tonight's meeting. And we are transitioning into the alternatives analysis work, which will be through the fall and the winter. So that's where we're at with the project. Next slide. So this picture right here, before I kind of go through all the nuts and bolts of summer outreach, this is from it was both our optional project advisory committee kind of summer informal gathering. We had pizza there at Brentwood Park. And then this was when we were transitioning into the bike ride around the neighborhood. And really appreciate that we had both committee members that attended, and it was great seeing all of you in person. And we also had members of the public join for the bike ride, since the bike ride was advertised on the Bike-a-Palooza list of events this summer. So it was kind of a nice mix. And I definitely got to do some off-roading bike activity that I never thought I would do in Brentwood, Darlington. So that was pretty exciting. But next slide. So here's just, if if you go back, yep, or to the previous one. There we go, yeah. So just a list of kind of what we were able to accomplish over the summer. And really, because we were able to accomplish so much, it was really due to the fact that we had a Portland State University Oregon Summer Fellow, Scott Goodman, who joined us on the project. So a lot of the fact that we were able to do so much is that we just had extra support this summer. So really quickly, we, per the committee's recommendation, we sent out a postcard to actually 15,600 residents, or I would say occupants. And so that included both residents and small businesses that occupy a space. And we were announcing the project, and as well as a link to the kickoff survey. And that was, I would say, kind of a phenomenal success as far as we were concerned, because we were able to get just right around 1,500 responses on the kickoff survey. And then additionally, just a part of the project awareness, we were able to have, just a little over 1,100 new subscribers to our project listserv. And when we are putting out a, kind of a periodic newsletter or milestone announcements, then we have that many folks that will get word of what's happening on the project. Scott also interviewed 9 community stakeholders, and each person, the interview was about 90 minutes in length, which is pretty substantial for an interview. And just really rich feedback, more in the qualitative side of data, and just hearing kind of people's personal experiences and narratives. So really rich information. Additionally, we wanted to do some focused door-to-door canvassing. And so we really were looking at the manufactured home sites in the project or the study area, as well as some of the affordable housing apartments. And within those kind of focused geographic areas, there were more than 20 informal interviews. And so not as long as the 90 minutes, but still, anywhere from a 5 to a 20-minute conversation per 20-minute informal interview. There was also some tabling, some very limited in-person at the Lentz Farmers Market, which I was able to join, and then presentations to the 82nd Avenue Business Association and the Southeast Active in Motion group. And then, of course, the Pedalpalooza bike ride through the project area. So some good activities this summer. Next slide. So we wanted to share with you some of the survey results, and just at a very high level, we were really pleased on the kind of the right-hand side of the slide that of the close to 1,500 people that responded in the survey, it was very, very, predominantly folks that lived in Brentwood, Darlington. And so that was a good thing for us. And then closely followed by Mount Scott, Arleta, and Woodstock, Lentz, and then, some other neighborhoods in the city, Foster Powell, Eastmoreland, and Ardenwald, Johnson Creek. Of the survey, if I was going to say, what we should kind of do some focused outreach on as we go on in the project, I would say we would probably want to do some more focused outreach in Lentz. So that's where we would like to get some more feedback from folks. As far as some themes of what we heard in the survey about what residents liked best about their neighborhoods, folks listed walkability, the community, people, and neighbors, which I think is really lovely, parks, trees, green space, nearby commercial amenities, and the quiet feel of the area. Next slide. So conversely, themes when asked about the biggest issues or challenges, you're going to hear some things that kind of contradict what people liked about the neighborhood. So whereas what people liked was walkability, then we also heard people were concerned about street safety and road conditions, including speeding, potholes, and unimproved roads, lack of sidewalks, and general walkability. And we have some thoughts about that contradiction. So, and then additionally, crime and safety was a concern. We've also heard that tonight. Houselessness, trash, noise, and abandoned automobiles. Next slide. As far as when asked to rank items for improvement of the neighborhood and quality of life as very important, somewhat important, or not very important, here's kind of what we heard. So addressing houselessness was the most important, very important issue at 79%, followed by making it safer to walk, bike, and or take transit at 78%. Then there was kind of like another tier of what folks were asked to rank, and those issues including having more trees, shade, and improving air quality, climate change resilience at 75%, improving community safety also at 75%, and then just slightly less important, but still important, improving access to parks, open spaces, and recreational spaces at 56%, developing anti-displacement strategies for residents and businesses at 49%, retaining, adding more affordable housing and choices at 45%, adding more businesses and stores, 41%, and adding more frequent and accessible transit service at 36%. So the next slide, we were just curious about, the question was, when traveling within the lower Southeast rising study area, where do you commonly travel to for commerce, such as groceries, shopping, dining, entertainment? And so you can kind of see this scatter dot diagram where, Woodstock, the Woodstock neighborhood center is kind of heavily dotted, as well as Foster. You see that? You see a cluster at 72nd and Flavel. And then interestingly enough, there's this cluster that's right kind of along 82nd, but really in the south. And our assumption of that cluster is that it's actually pointing south to Clackamas County. So to like the Johnson Creek, Fred Meyer, and to Trader Joe's, and perhaps Clackamas Town Center and other businesses that are south of the city limits. Because I'm assuming that that's not all Cartlandia that those dots are representing. Next slide. And then this scatter dot diagram is about recreation. So when traveling within the study area, where do you most commonly travel to for recreation, such as parks, natural areas, sports fields, etc.? And this is actually a really nice diagram because I feel like it shows kind of the nice, I would say, evenly disbursement of where recreational activities are and where people are opting to go for them. So when we shared this with the technical advisory committee last week, our parks planners were actually very pleased by what they saw in this diagram. Okay, and then if the scatter dot diagram as far as community, specifically when traveling to connect with the community, such as community centers, religious institutions, schools, libraries, etc. We see Woodstock is pretty heavily represented here. There are churches and the library and the community center within the Woodstock neighborhood center. And then, a little bit on Foster, it looks like Brentwood Park and Lane Middle School and the Brentwood Darlington Community Center are kind of shown in that cluster. And then there's just kind of an even distribution of other dots throughout the project area. One, I would say, criticism that we received about these various dot exercises is that we didn't ask the additional question of how are you traveling? What mode of transportation, whether it's by biking, walking, transit, or vehicle use. And so again, if we were to do the survey over, that would be an additional question that we would ask. Okay. So regarding the community interviews, just wanted to share some highlights as far as some of the neighbor assets that were shared, as well as some of the neighborhood concerns. So again, this was the 9 community interviews that were done at about a 90-minute average. So some of the assets are just resident creativity, general calm and quiet youth engagement, the opportunity that the Green Thumb site has unlimited potential but is currently underutilized. And that is said with a very positive, forward-thinking statement. Community-led organizations and nonprofits. So there's a lot of those groups are here, and it's considered a resource that we have these community-led groups and nonprofits. Neighborhood concerns. So again, the growing houselessness crisis experienced in the study area, garbage accumulation in the streets, overregulation from the city. Definitely, this is feedback that we heard from some of our small business owners. Speeding cars, insufficient tree canopy, the crossing at Southeast Woodstock Boulevard and Southeast 72nd, and just noting that we have heard other crossings of concern as well. That's just the one that came out in the interviews. And then displacement. And again, it's displacement of both residents, and businesses, and also places of kind of cultural and community identity as well. And this photo is really sweet. Scott took this photo of 2 folks that were part of more of the door-to-door canvassing. And he was just thought it was great that it was, 2 folks, and then the cat got to be in the photo too. So, okay, next slide. So some next steps as far as what we are planning for the fall is that we're going to do another online survey, just kind of acknowledging that we're in the Delta variant, hopefully starting to plateau a bit, but that we're just looking for another way to gather feedback. One thing that was really good about the postcard, in that it included mine and Brian Poole's email address, is we got a lot of emails. And a lot of the emails gave us really rich kind of site-specific concerns or opportunities. And so we do have a database, or I'm sorry, it's like an Excel worksheet that is categorizing all of that. But we thought it would be really cool to have a mapping tool that is online where people can put in site-specific like comments of concerns or opportunities, kind of that issue identification that would be viewable by the public. And so our BPS GIS team is putting together what they're calling it Pin It Portland. And this is a tool that will have the ability to be used on multiple projects that are in this kind of needs identification phase. But our project, the Lower Southeast Rising project, is going to be the project that is piloting this new tool. So they're working on some final communications, making sure the wording is right, and it should be launched, I'm hoping this week, next week. So it's imminent that this tool is going to be launched. So something to note and share with your network for sure. And we'll send out an email blast announcing to our 1,100 folks that are on our listserv that this tool is now available. Another thing that we are working on right now is we are working on hopefully a collaboration with Latino Network. With the kickoff survey that we did, we had it in both English and in Spanish. And we had 2 Spanish responses. So this is obviously an area that we need to adapt and figure out a way to reach our Latinx Spanish speaking neighbors. And so we're working on trying to develop a partnership with Latino Network right now. And we have a scope of work that we're working on with them. And then additionally, as we're pivoting into this alternatives kind of analysis work, we need to have some topic-based conversations. And so we are thinking that'll be later this fall or early winter. We're really wanting to do them in person. We are also navigating what is kind of best public health practices as well. But right now we're thinking about having 3. And so one would be around kind of designations of, looking at possibilities as far as, neighborhood center, neighborhood corridor, or kind of a commercial hub designation, and what would be the kind of supporting land use and equity tools for those options, and just kind of talking through pros and cons with the community. Another one would be around transit, specifically having a transit conversation. And then the third would be around active transportation. So specifically bicycle and pedestrian connections in the project area, maybe even some prioritization, kind of talking about, what's important. And then also talking about just the road, the condition of the street network itself, and just the unimproved streets. And so those are 3 topics that we've are identifying as needing to have the next conversation. And Melanie, you have a question, please.
Yeah, I don't know if they're using the same, obviously probably not the same software, but the Brentwood Darlington group has put together a map for Halloween trick-or-treating. And so it kind of reminded me of it a little bit, where we can just, sign up for, say, oh yeah, we'll be home, and people can sort of like, I didn't do it last year, but I know that it's happening this year, so I'll be around for that. And I just thought I'd mention that, that on a smaller scale, that these kind of maps are being used, which you probably know anyway.
Yeah, I've used that one personally as well. And, I'm not tech savvy enough to know like what's happening behind the scenes as far as what applications folks are using, but I love all the interactive maps that we are using in our daily basis. And the trick-or-treating map is definitely a good example. Okay, well, if there
was a
yeah,
question
please.
in the chat, actually.
Oh, great. I better pull up the chat. I am not seeing it right now.
I'll read it. Has anyone looked into translation into Vietnamese or Chinese from Vivian?
Yes, so that is also a really good question. When we initially scoped the survey, we had we definitely had, and those are the 3 languages: Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese for sure. And at the time, it was one of those where we had staff that could do the Spanish translation, but we didn't have in-house to do the Vietnamese and Chinese. And I think part of it was just wanting to kind of pilot and see if the Spanish language was going to be successful, or, just learn from the Spanish language. And we learned from the Spanish language that if we don't have the appropriate outreach or community partnerships along with the tool, that we're not going to get very well through our kind of mainstream communications. And so I would love to get some advice on that, because I think that with the Pennant Portland survey, my advice to the GIS team is that it does have the ability, I think through Google Translate, to do, you know, Vietnamese, Chinese, and other languages in the translation. And I specifically asked for it to be not just the translation of the staff text, but also of the text where the public is putting in comments. Like, I would really love for people to be able to translate and see what the public is saying. I need to check back in if that's an opportunity, but we could use some support in this area. So if you have additional thoughts, I'd love to get your ideas on that.
Is it something as hiring out from like ERCO or other organizations that do, or private hiring a translator and to do that?
Yeah, so it definitely would be something that it would either be ERCO or it would be like language. There's a number of language providers, but it's not just that. It's also, can we partner with a community organization to support the outreach as well? So it's like a two-pronged need that we have.
Anna's offices are just the north end of our area in terms of doing some outreach, or I don't know if you're asking, but the 82nd Avenue, it's the business district, the Jade district.
Marty, Eleanor has her hand up.
Oh, great, thank you, Eleanor. Do you know how the rate of participation in the summer survey compares to other recent projects or surveys in other Portland neighborhoods, either Southeast or beyond?
This is where I actually might need Shane. Maybe Shane knows the question. So we had the kickoff survey. We had kind of customized it from the North Portland in Motion. So they had a similar kickoff survey that had also used the dot kind of scatter dot diagrams as well. We had some slightly different questions, but Shane, do you know how many folks?
Yeah, it was fewer than this. I want to say it was around 1,000 for the North Portland in Motion effort.
Okay. Yeah, good question. I'm seeing some good ideas in the chat too, now that I have my chat bar up. So thank you, Kathy and Nancy. Okay. Anyone else? Any feedback before we move on to the commercial real estate?
Actually, this kind of dovetails the questions about translation, but other than wanting to focus more on Lentz as a neighborhood in whole, were there any groups that you guys really felt that you want to hear more from or missed out on hearing from during this initial survey?
I don't know about the survey, but as far as the interviews, there was, I would say, a concerted effort to really reach out to some of our religious organizations. And I think we had just the one church, the Apostolic Faith Church participated. So their facilities manager was agreed to an interview, but we have other places of worship that we just weren't able to make that connection with. And it's possible that during the summer, that's kind of a quieter time and people kind of, follow the school calendar and are busier during the 9 months and kind of quieter during the summer. So it may have been the time of year, but that's one group. I think that there's also the interest, and that was why we did a lot of the door-to-door canvassing, because we really wanted to kind of focus on, some of the manufactured home parks and affordable housing developments. But yeah, I'd have to give that some more thought. Yes, there's a lot of people and a lot of groups that we really just skim the surface. But there's always more people to talk with, for sure. And if Corrine was here, she would remind me of all the folks that we brainstormed I just can't think of it at the moment. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think we can move on to the commercial real estate and retail market analysis. And I'm going to close my chat box so I can see the screen. But if folks can help monitor the chat box and let me know if folks have questions or are raising hands, that would be great. Okay, so again, the commercial real estate and retail market analysis report was researched and pulled together by our former colleague, Andrea Pastor, who has since left for Metro. But I'm trying to do her work some good justice tonight and walk you through the report that I sent out last week. So next slide. Okay, so for the commercial real estate analysis, again, we're looking at the study area here, and specifically there in the study area, there is approximately 2 million square feet of commercial real estate. So that's a decent amount of commercial real estate. We break down the commercial property into 3 main uses. So we categorize it into office, retail, and industrial. And you can see that the commercial real estate is really dominated along our commercial corridors and our neighborhood centers. And then there's just these little kind of commercial nodes throughout the project area as well. So specifically Woodstock, 52nd, a little bit on Holgate, a lot on Foster, a lot on 82nd, and then a little smattering along 72nd as well. So the diagram on the left-hand corner, so the circles show lower southeast, so the study area as a whole, and compare that with the city of Portland as a whole. And specifically, you can see, and I'm going to get my colors wrong here, so I apologize, but we do have, I think, these blues and greens are really hard for me to read, but you can see that we have, I'm not going to even try to break this out. I'm going to ask you to refer to the report because I cannot, my color blindness cannot tell the difference between those colors. So apologize there. Next slide. Okay, this color is a little bit better for me. Real estate by sub-area. So we looked specifically within the study area at the 3 sub-areas of Woodstock, of Foster Boulevard, and 82nd. And specifically, you can see that Woodstock is overwhelmingly made up of retail commercial uses at 89%, with a very small percentage of office, which at 10%, and almost no industrial properties, so 1%. Whereas Foster Boulevard is also predominantly retail, so at 78%, but still retains a modest share of industrial at 12%. And includes some office at 10%. And then 82nd has a significantly higher amount of industrial uses, especially there kind of at south of Bybee into the city limits at 25%, while still mostly being dominated by retail. And again, just a very little bit of office at 9%. Next slide. The vacancy rates, I think, are really important to look at. And what this graph is or shows is it shows our most up-to-date data at 2021. So this was pulled kind of early this summer. So you have the Portland overall, which is, kind of overall vacancy is at about 8%. And then you have it broken down. Retail is about 4.6%. Office is a little over 13% vacancy. And then industrial is at 6.8% vacancy. Whereas if you're looking at the study area, specifically for Foster, Foster had full occupancy of its industrial commercial real estate until the fourth quarter of 2020. And now if you look at the vacancy rate of industrial, it's at 16.2%. So again, that just shows you kind of the stark economic crisis that happened specifically along Foster and the industrial commercial real estate. All of the sub areas had vacancy rates that were under 2% until 2020, which again was a really traumatic year for our local businesses. So if you look, about 2% vacancy rates for Woodstock, Foster, and 82nd, and then you can see what the current vacancy rates are as far as June 2021. So, okay, next slide. So for the commercial real estate rents, and again, we're looking at the 3 sub areas and how they compare to Portland overall. Woodstock has the highest overall rents based primarily on the market price of the retail space, and that, it's part of this neighborhood commercial center, this Main Street. Foster has higher rates than Portland overall. And, part of it is just the higher going rate for industrial space on Foster, kind of especially prior to the pandemic. The rents for retail and office space on Foster are lower than those found in the city more generally. And then 82nd tends to have the lowest rents across all 3 real estate types. And overall, 82nd Avenue has a higher retail vacancy rate than the city and the other sub areas, despite its considerably lower rents. And it just, may point to the fact that it's a highway and also decades of just lack of investment too. Next slide. Additionally, we also looked at some opportunity sub areas. And so specifically, those are 52nd and 72nd. And so again, you can see the overall inventory. So the square footage, there's more commercial square footage along 52nd with a little over 78,000 square feet compared to 72nd, which has just a little over 40,000 square feet. Vacancy rates, 0. And this again was as of about May, June 2021 this year. So that's saying something. And then again, the rents are slightly lower than those found on Woodstock, but really on par or slightly higher than those on Foster Boulevard and 82nd Avenue. Okay. Next slide. So one thing that we like to do along with just the overall retail market analysis, which, kind of better helps us understand, what opportunities exist. Is there a need for expanding commercial zoning? What kind of small business development kind of support would be helpful? And what is needed to kind of make a more equitable and complete community. So that's kind of why we do the retail market analysis. The gap analysis is a little different, and we like to pair them together. And that is to illustrate the difference between the retail demand in an area based on kind of a daytime population and the capacity to which the area's retail stores are meeting the demand. So this graphic on the right, the demand is shown as green. So the green bars are the demand, and the supply is shown in the red. And so essentially what this is showing you is that in the study area, the local supply is is not meeting the need, essentially. So all these green bars are basically showing people that are having to leave the study area to go get those needs further met. That there's that leakage, or those dollars that are having to leave the study area because the demand is so high. And that is in all categories except the health and personal care stores. And so I think what I shared with the TAC last week is, if you are a small business and you are wanting to open up a business and you have some flexibility on what type of business you're going to open, you probably do not want to open up a hair salon or a nail salon or something in that health or personal care store category, because they're again, that's already being overly met in the study area. But the green, the bars in the green, you're probably have a good business model if you're choosing one of those categories. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then something that I think was fairly unique to this report that Andrea really kind of honed in on was really looking at home-based businesses. So one thing in her research was in pulling from City of Portland business license registration data, was that there are a little over 1,100, almost 1,200 home-based businesses that exist in the study area. Of those approximately 1,200 home-based businesses, the bulk of them are categorized as other or unclassified. So we're actually not quite sure what those businesses are doing. We were kind of speculating in the TAC that it could be a lot of online sales. So we're kind of curious about that. So this right here is pointing to kind of a gap in our research. Like we would need to dig in further to identify where those about I think it was I'd have to double check the report, but it was a significant amount that was in that other unclassified category. Whereas there were a fair amount, so anywhere between 60 to 70 each, that were categorized as professional service, entertainment, and retail trade. And then additionally, if you filter the data by addresses, there are 42 home-based businesses listed on 72nd Avenue between Duke and Harney. And then conversely, on the 52nd corridor between Duke and Flavel Drive, there's only 4 listed of home-based businesses. And so again, what this data is pointing us to do is to do some really focused outreach to these home-based businesses on both 52nd, but really on 72nd. So that's an exciting finding from the report. Okay, final slide, and then I'm going to take a break from talking and you get to hear from Bill. So one thing I wanted to add was just kind of this, Andrea and I had an opportunity to sit down after her report and just kind of come up with what are some key findings for us as, project staff, like what's really jumping out at us. And so I just wanted to go over those really quickly with you. So again, number one, despite the significant amount of retail that exists in the lower Southeast, the purchasing power of the area residents compared to the retail sales revenue of local businesses indicate that the population consumes heavily outside of the study area. And with the exception of the one category of health and personal care stores. Number two, to incorporate equity into this analysis, we should really consider whose commercial needs are being least served as well as their relative ability to have their needs met elsewhere. And so that, again, it's really looking at the who. Filtering the data by addresses, again, highlighting the 42, that's a significant number, home-based businesses listed on 72nd between Duke and Harney. And then additionally, if you're just looking at the population from 72nd and Flavel and kind of look at the quarter mile, half mile out from that area, just knowing that we are, this is an equity population that we're, we would be working with. And so, if there was any consideration of, potentially expanding commercial opportunities, potentially expanding commercial zoning, we would need to be really surgical, very, very thoughtful about who would be potentially benefiting and who would be burdened by any city intervention. And then just final key finding was that further study is needed to really engage the owners of the existing home-based businesses to determine if there is a regulatory change that would be beneficial to them. We do have, you do have the ability of having a home-based business, but right now the limitations for home-based businesses is that you can either have one employee or you can have 8 customers, but you can't have both. And so I believe potentially through the Spatial Justice Project or through other things that either my bureau or Bureau of Development Services is working on, we can see if there actually are just some other regulatory other than zoning mapping changes. Are there other ways to benefit the home-based businesses in the ability to expand their business? So I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a drink because I've been doing a lot of talking of my kombucha, and let's see if there's any questions in the chat. And feel free to popcorn if you have anything that you wanted to ask a question about or just comment on too. And it's okay too, if we want to just move on to Bill giving his presentation, and we can come back to this. So
I did have one comment.
Yeah.
I was just curious because it just doesn't make sense because on 82nd, it's almost all, well, not all, but there's tons of car dealerships, auto parts and everything, auto lots, but there's still a need for more of that, or am I just reading that chart wrong? Because it doesn't, because it was showing green on that line for like motor vehicle stuff. And that seems weird. Like who's buying all those cars then? Are other people from other areas coming into 82nd? Or it just seems like if anything, there's too many car dealerships. I don't understand that.
I was on mute there for a second. Yeah, I'm not really sure. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Tim?
Marty, I was just curious, and I apologize if I missed this. How are those things broken up? Like, I was really curious of how each category is defined in the type of business. And then how the space is defined as residential, office, or industrial. Like, is there some sort of legend almost that stuff?
Yeah, and I this is where I really wish I had my colleague Andrea with me. My assumption is that these are categories that so there's a couple of sources that are listed, and I don't have the report in front of me, but those are pretty for economic purposes, those are kind of clear categories that are kind of used universally in kind of the economic real estate field, and they don't necessarily translate to the same ways that we classify for like zoning, for example, or for building code, but it's more of like how businesses are categorized within, again, the sources that Andrea was using. And I'm stumbling on my response to you, but again, there's kind of a universal way that businesses are categorized that, it's used for kind of economic and real estate purposes. So
I was just curious. So I wonder, is it like tax ID then that defines what the business is? Because I know for ours, we come under the restaurant and bar category.
Oh, interesting.
I think people should probably take a look at the report, because I believe Andrea's report has some of the source information. I think a lot of this data tends to be CoStar data and other kind of business analyst type information, and they use NAICS codes for categorizing businesses. But I think the report will clarify things to a greater extent than either Marty or I could do right now.
Yeah, and I just really quickly before we move on to Bill, there's just a couple comments in the chat. Hopefully I'm not missing anyone. So Jed asks, it seems the automotive need would be at least have some supply, red bar, given the auto lots. And so it sounds like Jed is agreeing with Julie on that point. And I apologize. I don't know how to respond to that question.
So I think I also misunderstood the chart. I thought it's probably total, right? It's either red or green, not symmetric. Okay, Bill is nodding. Okay, I read it wrong. So okay. That's not quite right.
And then Ryan is asking, is our main opportunity to get a business district in Brentwood, Darlington to have dense apartment buildings with stores underneath like we see in other places? I don't think that, I don't know. I mean, I'm allowing Stott to join us here in the meeting. I think the desire is, and it kind of relates to some of the equity goals that we developed as a group in the June meeting, but it's, we are looking at, are there ways to increase kind of housing opportunity in the area, but not aggressively so. Are there ways to increase the ability for there to be, more commercial amenities within walking distance? Yes, but not aggressively so. So I think the answer is yes, but in kind of, I would say a soft or kind of temporal way. And so it's not a really stark change overnight. It's something that can kind of happen in a very stabilizing way that benefits people that are here today. So, and that is a challenge that we have in a very rapidly changing city, for sure. Okay.
All right, are we ready to move on to the next item?
I think so. And we can definitely make some time for some more questions and discussion towards the end.
Yeah, the last questions actually feed into this next topic, which we're calling the opportunity mapping analysis. And what we're trying to do with this analysis is provide a baseline of information, looking at where we are currently in terms of access to commercial and community services in the study area. And in terms of that access, it's looking at two components of that access. One is where are the services in the area, where their locations, and what's the status of the infrastructure to support being able to walk or bike to those local services. And just so you know, this is really intended to support the community discussion. It's not actually providing all the answers. It's really just that baseline of information. Next, please. This slide is showing the designated centers in this area. And I'm sharing this because city policies really have centers as a linchpin component for access to services in the city. The idea is that each part of the city would have a center that serves as an anchor or a hub for commercial and community services. And they're largely built on places that already have some of that function. So you can see the circles here around the Woodstock Neighborhood Center, Heart of Foster on Foster over in the 60s, and then the Lentz Town Center, which is looking at actually both the area around 92nd and 82nd. The idea with centers is they're not only hubs for where the commercial and community services are, but they're also locations where we focus a fair amount of the growth so that more people could live close to those services. And they're hubs for our transportation systems. They're places we want to make sure that there's a range of housing opportunities like affordable housing and physically accessible housing. And you can see here that there's a bit of a blank spot in this map. Those round circles, by the way, are showing a half-mile radius around the core of each center. And that basically approximates to a walk shed or a walkable distance. And our analysis is showing that only 32% of the area's residents live within one of those half-mile radius circles. So the vast majority, 68%, live further than that. And as you can see, Brentwood Darlington is mostly outside that walkable distance. And that sets a framework, or at least a launching point for some of the discussion about access to services. Next, please. One thing this report does is it uses a lot of what we call the complete neighborhoods analysis that we've used for a number of city projects. And this is something that also used to be called the 20-minute neighborhoods analysis. And it's intended to measure the extent to which communities have the characteristics that support the ability to walk or bike to access daily needs in the community. And it's looking at a range of different kinds of destinations that the community has said were important. It's looking at where grocery stores are and other commercial services, as well as parks and schools. And this is especially focusing on non-car ways of accessing things. So it looks at pedestrian, bicycle, and transit access. And this is a tool we use to measure progress towards what we sometimes call complete neighborhoods. The Climate Action Plan calls for 80% of Portlanders to live in complete neighborhoods. The idea being we need a situation where people are not dependent on having a drive. You have options to be able to access needs locally. And what this is showing in this diagram is the hot spots, the yellow to white, are the areas that have relatively good access, a high level of access to services, and have the supporting infrastructure to be able to get there. And you can see the cool areas, the blue to purple, where you don't have the best access to services. You can see Brentwood Darlington showing up in that area. And according to this analysis, only about 33% of the lower Southeast residents live in areas that have a combination of both a good amount of destinations and the supporting infrastructure. So if you keep in mind that our goal, citywide goal, is to have 80% of people living in complete neighborhoods, a good chunk of this area is not in that sweet spot in terms of access. And I do want to apologize because I know most of you live there, so you experience this and already know it, but we did want to provide some objective information to support the situation in the area, or our knowledge of the situation. The next series of slides is going to look at some of the layers of information that feed into that overall complete neighborhoods index. One, a key component in terms of being able to access your needs locally, or grocery stores. So this is showing where grocery stores or smaller stores are located. And our analysis is showing about 40% of area residents are within a half mile of a grocery store. So there are definitely some gaps. Next, please. This next map is showing in the hot spots areas where you have larger clusters of commercial services. And this is focusing on things like retail, personal services, eating places. So this doesn't actually look at our car dealerships or landscape supply places. That's somewhat more daily needs type situations. And you can see the hotspot over in Woodstock and then along Foster and 82nd. I can move on to the next one. Another kind of destination we looked at is where parks are located. And you can see that compared to the broader Southeast area, the area actually has a good distribution. And it appears that about 100% of the area's residents do live within a half mile of a park or community center. So this area is not so bad in terms of at least the location of parks. Next, please. Elementary schools, another anchor to being able to live locally. And you can see the locations, the white spots around where the public elementary schools are. And we don't have an expectation that everyone live within a quarter mile or half mile. We generally have been looking at measuring a distance in terms of a mile from an elementary school, and nearly all the study area is within a mile of an elementary school. So not so bad in terms of that component of community destinations. And next, please. All right, moving on to the components that really are about the infrastructure to support being able to walk or bike to destinations in the area. This map is showing pedestrian access, and it's the hot spots measure places that both have sidewalks and have pretty good street connectivity. So pedestrians could access places in a relatively direct way. And you can see that the northern parts of the study area, you've got the black lines where the sidewalks are, and the overall measure is showing fairly bright yellow, fairly decent pedestrian facilities in the northern portion. But down in Brentwood, Darlington, you can see the cool colors and the lack of sidewalks, and typically the connectivity is not quite as good either. So you could see that half of the study area is not so different from a lot of inner Southeast, but it really starts changing in the Brentwood Darlington neighborhood. Next, please. All right, the next measure is looking at bicycle access, and this was mapping bicycle facilities, including bike lanes, neighborhood greenways, off-street paths. And you can see the areas that are glowing a bit more, including 52nd Avenue, as well as the Springwater Corridor. But again, the southern half of the study area does not have a lot of good bike facilities. So in terms of supporting walking and biking to these neighbor destinations, or even places a little bit further afield, we don't have a lot of the best infrastructure to support that. Next, please. The next infrastructure measure was looking at transit access, and this is looking at where the frequent service transit lines and other transit facilities are. Basically, areas that are close to frequent transit lines showed up as glowing white, and areas further from transit show up as the cooler colors. And but 41% of the study area residents live within a quarter mile of frequent service transit. One thing to note here is typically we have frequent service transit on the major corridors where we also have our multi-dwelling and commercial zoning. And you have that pattern on Foster and 82nd and Chavez. One thing where it does break down is Woodstock Boulevard is almost completely multi-dwelling zoning between 52nd and 82nd. But Woodstock, although it's designated as an important neighborhood corridor, it does not have transit service. So something to note here. All right, next, please. For those of you who wanted to take a look at services in a finer level of detail, or look at least a snapshot in time at some of the services, this map is showing the locations of commercial services in the little round circles. It's also showing places of worship. You'll have to take a look at the report, but there are little buildings on that diagram that show the churches, which are definitely more dispersed than the commercial services. This is also showing services such as daycares and preschools. At least the data we had was showing that there aren't an awful lot of daycares in the area, which is important to a lot of working parents. So take a look at that. I'm not going to go through everything here, but you can kind of see the clusters of destinations on Woodstock, Foster, 82nd, and over by the Lentz Town Center. Next, please. One other thing we added was looking at where we have urban heat islands, the hotter areas. As those of you who made it through August know, we had a very hot summer, and we're expecting summers to become hotter and drier over time with climate change. And this map is showing in the orange to red tones the areas that have had hotter August temperatures in the afternoon, and the green areas that are relatively cool. And so the areas showing up as hotter in terms of those afternoon temperatures are places over towards I-205, especially the industrial areas near the Springwater corridor, where you have more paved surfaces and fewer trees. But you're also seeing areas show up along Faville, where you have manufactured home parks between 72nd and 82nd and apartment complexes. Yeah, basically the things that end up leading to the hotter temperatures are just the lack of tree cover, the greater amount of pavement, and buildings without trees. And you know, Faville's interesting. It really shows up as a hot spot. It's not a street like 82nd, but it does have a fair amount of paved right-of-way, blacktop, without street trees for the most part. One thing to note here is the two cooling centers in the area, with the Woodstock Library and the Holgate Library, which had extended hours during the heat event, are not especially close to the areas that have had the hottest temperatures. There was a 24-hour cooling center over at Kellogg Middle School, and you can see that barely at the northern edge of this map. So just so we're aware of the hot spots and the cooling centers, we have this. And you know, it's something it considers too, as we're cultivating centers that become more urban in terms of districts like the Lentz Town Center or Foster. Do cooling centers need to be a core part of those areas? Just something to think about moving forward. Next, please. All right, as you can see from some of those maps, the areas where we already have designated centers are not so bad in terms of access to services. What we were doing with this next map was to do a little bit of analysis, at least the beginnings of an analysis, to look at you know, what if we were to cultivate a neighborhood center at 72nd and Faville, where we already have a grocery outlet. And just to explain some of the colors here, the blue tones are the multi-dwelling zones, and the yellow to orange tones are the single dwelling zones, and the mixed use zones are kind of more towards the red color. You can see it in Woodstock and along Foster, and some of these dark colors are mixed use as well. And there's over by 72nd and Faville, there's actually a goodly chunk of multi-dwelling zoning. There's a manufactured home park pretty close. And one thing we did was to fall back on some of the analysis we did for complete neighborhoods in terms of looking at the population needed to support a neighborhood center, or basically a business district with a broad range of services anchored by a supermarket. There are a number of estimates of what it takes, the population it takes to support a mixed-use district, and generally they tend to range between 6,000 to 10,000 households. In our comprehensive plan for the larger centers, we kind of found a mid-range figure, and our target is to have zoned capacity so that 7,000 households can over time live within a half-mile walkable distance of a center and really support those services. And Lentz Town Center is an example of one of those town centers. Now, the smaller neighborhood centers like Woodstock and Heart of Foster, the policy goal is to have about half of the needed population within a half-mile radius of the center. The idea being is that the rest of the population needed to support that center would come from surrounding areas. So we did a little bit of analysis to look at 72nd and Faville in terms of looking at the population and the zone capacity. Does it have the potential to have the population to support a neighborhood center? The current population is about 2,500 households, and the zone capacity is about 3,200 housing units. So it actually provides zoned capacity to support what we expect in a neighborhood center. Now, one thing that 72nd and Faville is currently lacking compared to other designated neighborhood centers, it does not have a lot of commercial and mixed use zoning. It has 5 acres around that node of 72nd and Faville. And that compares to 29 acres in the neighborhood center, the Woodstock neighborhood center, which has 29 acres of commercial and mixed use zoning. Heart of Foster, it's closer to 50. And generally our designated neighborhood centers have about 20 to 50 acres of commercial and mixed use zoning. And that's typically an amount that supports a pretty broad range of services. And I should mention that we've tended to focus on commercial services, but an aspiration the communities often had for neighborhood centers is that they should be places not just to buy things, but over time they should be places that have a broader range of community services and gathering places. And also policies for centers, because they're not only where the services are, but where we focus growth. They also call for those centers to be served by frequent transit service. That's something we would probably want to look at with 72nd and Faville, because that location is not served by frequent service transit. This is really just the beginning of an analysis and to work with you, the community, to look at options for the future of this area. We don't know if a neighborhood center is the right answer to fill in that gap for access to services. Subsequent conversations, and I should mention there's going to be an alternatives analysis, which will be a next step, and we'll be looking at other ways of filling in the gaps in terms of services in the area. It could be that 72nd and Faville just needs to be strengthened as a small commercial node, or maybe 72nd could be cultivated as a corridor where there's more flexibility for small commercial uses or live work arrangements with the housing there. But those are all what you have to look forward to moving forward in terms of future possibilities. I consider this opportunities analysis more of that starting point for the discussion. At its most basic, this is really about showing the two components that support access, where the destinations are, where the infrastructure is or isn't. What follows from here is really going to be up to you. It doesn't have to be a center at all there. It could be about strengthening connections, transportation connections to Woodstock or Foster or Lentz. But at any rate, the next steps are really about the future possibilities. Any questions? Before we move into breakout groups, is that right, Marty? Is that going to be the next item?
I just wanted to flag Brian's question in the chat for you about the 2030 vision, as far as I have to refer to it here. And Brian, feel free to jump in and make sure I'm articulating your question correctly here.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can go back to the bike slide that you had about bike infrastructure or something like that. This is so with the bike.
Yes. If you're referring to the 2030 bike plan, this is only showing the in-place bicycle infrastructure. It could be interesting to see if it were built out, how might it change that? But good question. Yeah, it's intended to focus just on what's completed and on the ground currently.
is there a way that we could have what that would look like so that when we come back and say, you know, this is what it is, this is what it could be, and this is what we need to do to make that happen, A, and then B, there was something else I was going to mention. Forgot, but that's okay. I can chat it. Thank you.
Sure, and that's a good idea. I don't know everything that our PBOT colleagues have in mind for looking forward in terms of their future work, but that's something we could plug into this model.
Well, I know what it was. I know that my house score right on Redfin says that, you know, my bike rating is like 60 or 70, and I'm like, there's no way that's possible. But anyways, thank you.
Sure.
I was wondering if there's any, if you guys have looked at 92nd and Flavel where the max station is, because it's like right now it's just kind of a wasteland. It's just, there's kind of nothing. I mean, it's, yeah, people who live there can use the max, but it seems like that would be an interesting place to consider having like the, you know, like the apartments that have the retail underneath or things like that to make it, I don't know, just make that max station more useful or more frequented. It just seems like when I've used it, it's like there's nobody around, and I refuse to use it at night because of that. It just seems just like this vacant area, and it just seems like it's not really getting used the way it could be. And also there's also, from what I understand, there isn't bus service from there to the 72nd and Flavel. So it seems like there's an opportunity within those two intersections. Like there could be stuff, I don't know. There just seems like there's a lot of missed opportunity there.
Yeah, that is a good point, because our policies call for our light rail transit stations to be hubs of our infrastructure as well, and so it's easy and safe for people to get there. A good point. And before I know their hands up, but I wanted to highlight something, and we've called this analysis the complete neighborhoods analysis, but it's actually a bit of a misnomer, because it's not really the case that each neighborhood or each area could be complete and have everything you need. Think of it as really connected and complete neighborhoods, because as you know, to access jobs, more often than not, your job is not in your neighborhood. So part of the concept is having a network of centers that are anchors to the community that are well connected by transit and other means to get around. Let's see, I know Vivian and then Eleanor.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. My question is more of a clarification. Would the development of the 72nd and Flavel area be contingent on the ability to improve or provide better transit access, bike ped infrastructure, and tree canopy, all those gaps that we were seeing in your other maps?
Yeah, that's another excellent question, because it's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of question, because typically we've applied neighborhood center designations in places that are already well served by transit and some of those other features. But that's not to say you can't have a policy intent and policy aspiration that this location is one that we're designating as a hub for the community and a place that should become well served by transit. So it's, yes, I think if the question is, you know, is there a possibility of, if the community is interested in a neighborhood center designation, is it possible to apply a designation to a place that doesn't already have things like frequent service transit? I think it is, but there would definitely have to be a considered effort to try to bring it on board in terms of the infrastructure needed to support that designation.
Yeah, it seems like if it's going to be a successful, well-loved commercial center, that we have to simultaneously lift those other gaps that are missing right now.
Yeah, good question. And, you know, it's about a timing too. There could be questions down the line as, do you wait to change land use designations until we have things like frequent service transit? Because, you know, there could be concerns about allowing a lot more housing in a place that doesn't have good access, but definitely a discussion point that should be part of this plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Eleanor.
Is there within the entire project area, like a measure that's clearly a huge barrier that if like bike access or frequent service transit that would really increase the complete neighborhood features, like lift up more, like a glaring thing like that there aren't sidewalks in the southern project area, but more comprehensively of the entire project area? Is there something that's just very glaring?
I haven't taken a super close look at all those numbers, but at a glance, it appears that the components that are weakest in the southern part of the study area and Brentwood Darlington are really having concentrations of commercial services, as well as the access. So what I saw is that the coolest, the blue tones were typically for pedestrian access, bicycle access, and to some extent transit access. So it seems like if you were able to work on both strengthening the numbers of commercial destinations in a compact area, as well as working on access, you could move the needle. If that answers your question. And let's see it. I wasn't paying attention to everything being said in the chat. Marty, anything that jumped out at you?
Yes, there's a robust chat going on, and I'm trying to keep on top of it as well. I think Valeria I just was focusing on the last question. Like just wanting to see kind of where the overall existing conditions data that we pulled in this summer, if there was anything specific about housing and homelessness in the project. And I know that the existing conditions atlas, we did focus on both demographics, which includes, the range of incomes, as well as touching upon housing, not at a super in-depth level, but in kind of a macro level for the study area. I'm sure that there's additional depth we could do, and I will link to it before this meeting ends. And then I'm trying to see.
Yeah. And something to consider moving forward too is in a number of our most recent planning projects, we've been trying to think about how change is introduced to an area and thinking about how, if we introduce some change, what are we doing to create stability within the community, especially for lower income residents, and resilience in the community. So that I suspect will probably be a topic here. So that's something I hope people keep in mind and really bring back into the discussion. I think we definitely have a major concern about displacement that could result from changes, while at the same time knowing that we want to make sure all parts of the city have equitable access to services. Valeria.
Yeah, on the anti-displacement issue, could you confirm that even if there are any sort of investments and improvements in the project area, taxes wouldn't increase more than 3% a year, correct? There's like already a maximum 3% increase on property taxes. So is that correct?
Yes, there is a state legislation that limits the amount property taxes could increase.
So have you seen then more displacement for renters and homeowners? What is, assuming that yeah, I'm just wondering, I know there's, I mean, another component on commercial displacement, and wondering if there is some sort of similar law that also protects them as well. Thank you.
Sure. We have staff at Bureau of Planning Sustainability working on the anti-displacement action plan, and they would be in a much better situation to answer that. But having been in some of the conversations, my understanding is renters are typically more vulnerable to displacement due to increases in rents. But it's not to say that there isn't displacement of homeowners. In some areas like Albina, homeowners have sometimes you have unscrupulous, I guess, real estate developers or people purchasing properties before property owners know that you know, their property is valued, as well as you also have sometimes displacement related to cultural support changes in some areas. As communities have weakened or places of worship have left, homeowners have moved along with those. So it's bottom line is, my understanding is renters are the more vulnerable, but it's not to say that there isn't some displacement of homeowners.
Just one more thing. Just thinking about affordability. I mean, something that comes to mind is, I don't know how useful it would be, but I know that I think there are bigger lots in the project area, and I'm wondering from a zoning perspective, you know, adding ADUs in people's backyards, or just sort of being able to split lots. Is that like, from the top of your head, sort of potential like strategy to support that? I mean, the financing is like another thing, but I think there is, with HB 2001, everything has been, all residential has been zoned to allow for duplex and more than one dwelling per lot, correct?
Yes, and an opportunity not everyone's aware of is that an example of a type of development that could happen without necessarily displacing an existing property owner or a homeowner is 2 accessory dwelling units are now allowed in each single family lot. So I know some of the southern portion of the area has fairly deep lots. It's larger than 5,000 square foot lots. So someone could conceivably put in 2 smaller detached accessory dwelling units into a deep backyard. We don't know the extent to which people will be adding to what's already there versus you know, replacing what's there, but it's not been uncommon up to now for people to keep an existing house and add to it. And of course, there are a lot of questions about how do we create a situation where existing property owners are benefiting more directly from being able to add units versus just selling to a developer. Something to think about, but there are new opportunities definitely with the residential infill project to add units to existing houses.
I'm gonna just do a quick time check. I know that we presented a lot of information, and I think very easily we could do Q&A and just discussion for quite a while this evening, but we are at 7:50. In the chat, I'll do it again. I am putting in a link to the Jamboard for this evening. I was hoping that we would have about 15 minutes to do small group breakout, and that we could do a quick review kind of in the small groups of kind of what surprised you, if there were any like key takeaways, and or are there questions that you have on the summer outreach, on the commercial real estate and retail market analysis, and then on the opportunity mapping analysis. And I just don't think we're going to have enough time to do the small group breakouts. So the link is in there. I will share with you that we use the same Jamboard that we used with the Technical Advisory Committee. And so you can see in the yellow stickies, if you're going to the link right now, you can see that there's the stickies that the Technical Advisory Committee has already put on the 3 slides. I would just ask, I've taken a picture of the screens or the screens, and so I know which one are for the Technical Advisory Committee, but just for your own, if you're wanting to add stickies, if you could use another color other than yellow, so it just stands out as this is a Project Advisory Committee sticky. And if you are wanting like specific staff to get back to you, feel free to put in your name, or you're welcome to just email Brian and myself directly if you have some follow-up questions or just thoughts that you want to share. And I'm really sorry, the small group breakout was so much fun in June, and I want to respect people's time, but I think we'll just need to not go there tonight. I'm sorry. And I just wanted to highlight that the conversation around 92nd and Flavel, and just the transit linkage from 72nd and Flavel to 92nd and Flavel, that was really like great information. So like, thank you for that bit of feedback and that nugget. I'm really excited to explore that. And then also, we have more work to do in task 3, and we absolutely will be looking at 52nd as well, not necessarily with the neighborhood center lens, but what are some other things that can be explored along 52nd. I think what we had on the remaining slides were just, doing the small group exercise, and then just kind of open Q&A, and then just kind of doing a touch point on kind of next steps. So Shane, if we could go back to the slideshow and just get me to the last slide, I think that would be great. And I definitely welcome you all to, again, get into the Jamboard tonight. And if there can be a more collaborative sticky note sharing, feel free to ask notes and, draw exclamation points around other people's points that you agree with. Just have fun with it. Okay, yeah, this was the small group exercise that we were hoping to do tonight. Now we have 6 minutes left, and I just want to respect people's time with their families this evening. But again, we were wanting to know if anything surprised you about the findings, what key takeaways you want to elevate, or you want to put some advocacy weight behind, and then if there were any questions that you had from the information. And please go to the reports themselves, because there may have been there may be a question that you have that actually is answered in the report as well. Next slide. Okay, so let's see. So we actually do have the date of the next Project Advisory Committee meeting. And that date is November 15th. And so that will be the next time that we meet as a Project Advisory Committee. And then just kind of highlighting that, we went over, we've gone over all the task 2 deliverables. So again, the existing conditions atlas. So we did that in June. And then today we kind of closed out task 2 with the commercial real estate and retail analysis, as well as the opportunity mapping analysis. And so now we're moving into task 3. And so, what we'll need to be connecting with you on in November in kind of subsequent meetings is getting into the equity and land use alternatives analysis. And we definitely touched on it today, but we're gonna revisit the kind of the advancement or the evolution of the conversations as far as some potential land use, city interventions, and what are the equity implications for that. And just, I just want to share that you have staff that are really going to be kind of conservative because we definitely want to do a do no harm intervention when we are talking about changes in the city in regards to land use. We also have the transit network analysis and then the active transportation analysis along with the street improvement analysis. So that's kind of the series of reports that we'll be talking with you about in task 3. And then in addition, the public involvement around that is we have the Pin It Portland, which is the next online survey, more interactive. People can see each other's comments. Fingers crossed, I've advocated for a translation option of that. So that's coming. And then this desire to have the 3 topic-based community meetings, and I'm still obviously navigating whether or not those are going to be in person or online. And then as far as action items kind of coming out of this meeting, definitely want to get your feedback on today's Jamboard. And I really would like to, encourage all of you to email Brian and I, Bill and Shane that are here with me tonight if you have additional questions, or if you had an idea that, comes to you a few days later after this meeting. We want to hear from you. Anything else? I'm so sorry. This was so dense information that we didn't get to the small group breakout, because I think that would have been really enjoyable. But we have a couple more minutes of people, and I'm happy to stay after the meeting too and just talk with folks too. So I'm just, Kathy, do no harm in the focus, or yeah, I mean, that is definitely something that we're striving for sure. Tim.
So there's been a couple times where you guys have mentioned like reading the reports, and I assume that's a document that is the underlying of the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
Is that on the link that you just put in the chat? Because I was trying to find it where
Yeah, so in my most recent email to the committee, which I think was Thursday of last week, I attached the commercial real estate report and the opportunity mapping report. So those were PDFs that were in my email. So please look for that. Right now we have the existing conditions atlas is posted on the website. And so as well as the commercial real estate report is also on the website. I have yet to post the opportunity mapping analysis yet.
Okay, the one with the agenda, is that?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Because that was just those are the same PDFs that you went over today, correct?
Yes, so those are, yes.
I guess I'm sorry, I'm confused then. So you said you emailed us the reports that have more of the information than what's in the PowerPoints?
Yes, so those are in my email from last Thursday.
Thank you.
Ryan?
Yeah, so I do respect the do no harm approach, but I also am like, I also feel like we're like
Experience
blue.
harm.
We're blue.
Yeah.
We're purple.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I deal with my local, transportation and folks at, through BD land use, and it's just like, yeah, we want to. I hear one person say we should be thankful for what PBOT gives us, but at the same time, I'm like, even a speed bump or two is pennies compared to, like North Willamette that gets like a total resurface and restriping like 3 years ago, and now I hear another $6 million for a project. And I'm not trying to like drag all that in there, but I'm like, I'm still blue, I'm still purple. So I mean, I'm just hoping that balance doesn't come across as like do no harm as like, we get little in turn of that. You know what I mean? I really hope that that doesn't come across that way per se. Obviously, I want people to not be displaced, but I also want to have basic facilities.
And I really appreciate that comment, Ryan. And that's something that the project team is definitely, we are grappling with. And I think that when I say do no harm, it's coming from me as a land use planner versus a transportation planner. And I think the desire in this geography is to what needs to be done to get this geography to a basic level of service from a transportation angle. And so if I had so Shane is here representing PBOT, but you know, you would definitely be hearing that loud and clear from our PBOT project teammates that there's a basic level of service that is not being met right now. And so there absolutely is that desire and that need for advocacy, you know, hopefully when we come up with a joint recommendation of what that looks like for this area.
I have a quick question. Will you be bringing us updates on any, I know it's going to be a fairly long process, but the transition of handing over 82nd from the state to the city, you know, there's about like, I think it was like $80 million of like investments, and just wondering, will you keep us in the loop of like any progress of certain like investments that are being proposed along the 82nd corridor? I think that's very, very fit to the work that we're doing, and wondering like who is overseeing that sort of work, and how do we align together on that?
Yeah, you know, I was kind of thinking about that too, and you know, a desire to bring kind of some of our content or project staff from other projects that are impacting kind of this area. So 82nd, I did hear a lot in the conversation about the residential infill project, which is now effective as of August 1. And so they're you know, connecting this group with getting more information about the residential infill project and what that means, I think would be helpful. And then I just received an email on Friday, actually Bill and I did, from some of our parks planner about the tree giveaway that's happening. And so I would like to forward that email to you all as well. So there's a lot that's happening in this geography, and it's just trying to figure out how to navigate project content with other timely and key city endeavors as well. And then Valeria, I just wanted to call out that you had so kindly let me know about the Oregon walk in Lentz Friday. And I missed your email, but I don't know if anyone was able to attend the Oregon walk on Saturday in Lentz that was really focused on the urban heat islands. That was, I'm sorry I missed that email to get it out to folks, but lots of good updates.
I think on your point of the tree program, I mean, that would be really useful because like when I look at their website, I know that they have sort of like equity focused areas, and I believe Southeast is one of them. So it would be helpful to know, I don't know, just like a report on, you know, where are they seeing people sort of like use the program? And I mean, maybe potentially the same thing when it comes to the residential infill project. I mean, where are we seeing middle housing being built around the city, and what are the incentives, or how are people making it happen? You know, is it happening in Southeast? I know there are some few pilot projects that are helping low income families build ADUs to create wealth and stabilize families and promote intergenerational living. So I'm wondering like how that's connected to this project area. Like what are some things that we're not taking advantage of and are offered, and yeah.
Again, I want to respect people's time. So if you need to leave, I think that concludes the meeting for tonight. But again, I'm happy to stick around and just see if anyone else wants to ask questions or chat or whatever it needs, but whatever the needs are this evening.
And Maria had suggested that people could also send emails to you and get back to people about questions they have.
Absolutely.
Beyond the time of this meeting.
I have another question. I'm sorry. I'm wondering if it's PBOT the right person or the right agency to answer this, but I want to understand a little bit more of like how the budget works and which specific like transportation projects are prioritized in the city. Just because, you know, I see improvements along Division that have happened this past year. And, you know, yeah, like, I mean, I don't know how much they cost, and I think some of them are maybe requirements, but I would just like to know why some specific projects are being prioritized to be funded in areas where I could argue there is like already sidewalks, already great public transportation and connectivity. They have greenways. And so just like comparing neighborhoods and why are we not focusing on trying to get all neighborhoods to at least have sidewalks? Like, why isn't that a priority and why other things are a priority in other neighborhoods? I would love to understand that.
Try to answer part of that. Yeah, I think this across the city, but I guess I'll speak just for PBOT. We have not that much discretionary funding. And so the discretionary funding that we do have, we try to use in a way that leverages other funding sources. And usually what that means is we have to kind of abide by other jurisdictions' priorities. And so Division, as an example, that was a regional process priority. And yeah, we couldn't have that. That's not really a fungible project, and we had to put something forth to make it happen. So yeah, there are definitely instances where we are building things in places and making places that are already at that sort of baseline level. We're putting even more money into it, and that happens because there are opportunities that somebody or some group of somebodies at PBOT sort of makes the calculation that taking the little bit of discretionary funding that we do have and putting it towards this will result in some larger impact than building sidewalks, for example. And so that there is you're right, there is a prioritization somewhere. And part of what this project will help us do is have sort of a set of projects that has community support and advocacy behind it, so that when we go, we can demonstrate that there's support, and we can demonstrate that there's sort of a regional nexus for projects in this area. And so that's why this work is super crucial in sort of in figuring out how the land use is going to speak to the transportation, so we can start to say, okay, we definitely know we want to invest here, and this is going to connect to all these other things, and we can leverage these funding sources. And then we can start working to get other jurisdictions to give us their money and leverage the little bit that we have. So it is frustrating, and you're right that we're spending money in places that appear to already have a baseline level of infrastructure that many parts of this project area do not have.
Thanks, Shane. It would be helpful if you let us know if like this group can advocate in other spaces and sort of lift that point up, whether it's city council or the planning commission or wherever it is that we need to, speak up about that. Let us know how we can support you to do that.
Definitely, I'm sure that will be a part of the kind of implementation discussion of this process. Is how do we go forward? Where does this information need to be presented, and who needs to help, or who can help us make the case for the recommendations that come out of this?
Typically these project advisory committees, like they run, an 18-month process kind of through the development of the plan. And then at that point, there's kind of a transition where, the advisory committee sunsets in that it's no longer meeting. And that is because we're transitioning into the legislative process where we're holding the hearings before the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and then we're holding the hearings before City Council. And so this advisory group can then transition into, instead of advising staff, which is the role now, into advocating for things that they really, feel are very critical about the plan. There can also be some disagreement about aspects of the plan too, that there can be advocacy related to. And then the conversation changes, where that conversation is then directed at the decision makers and staff. We hope that there will be continued coordination so we can, kind of act in partnership. But yeah, there's a transition that happens, and likely that will happen in summer or fall of next year, where there's that transition that happens. Lots of good questions tonight and lots of good discussion. Yeah, I feel like with all these meetings, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much depth to go, for sure.
That's what I was just wondering. I just feel so confused isn't the right word, but it seems like with the number of participants that everybody kind of has a sort of different level of interest. You definitely have people that are sitting on the bike and different, interested in housing and stuff like that. Like, how does that all coalesce into one sort of committee group recommendation? And, I guess I have a hard time seeing how it works out down the next 12 months or whatever.
Yeah, well, we definitely need all those different perspectives. So it's kind of our hope when we recruit for an advisory committee. But this is a joint land use and transportation plan, and so the intent of this planning effort is that we will have long range land use recommendations with kind of equity considerations or kind of this community development package. That land use is in I think land use planners and transportation planners, we kind of fight what's more important first. Is it the land use or it's the transportation? And so we had that ongoing struggle. But there is that, well, what's the transportation recommendations that are going to support the land use? And so this next phase, we're going to have 3 or 4 different potential alternatives. One is like, it's kind of a do nothing or do not very much on the land use side, but do more on the transportation side to connect to other parts of kind of lower Southeast. So really getting people to Woodstock, or really getting people to Lentz, or getting people downtown. And then there would be, some options around 50-second, 70-second, some different scenarios there, and what's the transportation that supports those different options. And then what I got really excited about tonight was just this flagging of 92nd and Flavel. Like, that's kind of the first that's kind of come up for us as staff. And so that is giving us direction that that's something that we need to explore in this next phase of work. And so, and again, there's really some pros and cons with what we're going to be recommending, because some of them are less of a red flag for potential equity considerations, where, it's kind of some surgical or light touches. Like if we were to zone 72nd Flavel and zone 15 acres of commercial, which is kind of what's needed to get to a neighborhood center. That's a really like uber aggressive and potentially the burdens could be significant on that. And so I think that's kind of the conversation that we would need to have kind of in this next phase, why some alternatives are more at risk and why some alternatives are easier to make the professional rationale for, and then what's the advocacy behind. So that's kind of the next phase of work. So, and it yeah. Yeah.
Can I just ask, what's the difference between those two types of town centers? Like
The
you're saying a
neighborhood center
neighborhood center versus town center. And the reason I looked confused when I asked my question earlier about the reports is because I did read those, but I was kind of hoping to dive in a little deeper because there were things like, I don't know the difference between those centers.
Tim, I'm going to put a link in the chat, and it's for what's called the Urban Design Framework or the UDF report. And there's probably a series of, I would say, homework or background reading that as planners, we're probably amiss in not flagging those for you. So I'm going to put that in the chat, and I might go ahead and send it out to the group as well, because I think that would be just a really good background report for people to be familiar with when we're talking about neighborhood center, town center, neighborhood corridor, civic corridor. What does that mean?
I just might mention, neighborhood centers are typically these smaller centers intended to serve just the surrounding neighborhoods. Examples of that would be like Woodstock or Multnomah Village, or there's a Cully neighborhood center, sort of smaller, almost Main Street based centers. And town centers are intended to be these much larger centers that serve a whole broad area of the city. So St. John's, Hollywood, and are examples of town centers. So it's a matter of scale, basically.
Yeah, that would be great. I know for me to learn a little bit more, because when you say like the scale, like I can understand that concept, but I don't know what that means. Like, does it mean like there has to be a more frequent bus service through that, or what's the consequence in terms of the planning when those two things are different?
Yeah, and it's typically our town centers are supposed to be connected to high capacity access, like things like light rail. So it's, well, neighborhood centers, it's more often frequent bus service.
I just want to say thank you. My kids are about to break down the door. So I have to go.
Sure. Thanks for being here.
I really enjoy
your light effects in the background too.
That's all my wife's. This is her setup for her working from home for HSU. So.
It's very peaceful. Well, those are some really good questions. Like the urban design framework is, we should dust that off and send it out to folks, because it is, Mark Raggett put it together, and it's, it's a communication tool on how to describe our centers and corridors policy and spatial thinking. Yeah. Okay. I think that we might want to call it. I'm going to actually end the recording now.